This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're talking to people who know how things work and have influence over how things work. It's my great pleasure to be sitting here today with David Royer, who is the Executive Director of the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of Franklin County. He has been here for about, since 97 or so?
2000.
2000. And prior to that, he was at Butler County. So we go back about almost a quarter century now.
Right.
And which means, I have to be very say that this means there is obviously some portrait of you somewhere that is aging horribly, because I don't think you've changed at all in a quarter century.
Well,
is it just doing the Lord's work makes you go through all this?
I think it is doing the Lord's work, and my mother's genetics.
Your mother's genetics. There we go. Well, so first of all, you started off, okay, I remember you back when you were running the Butler County ADAMH board.
Right.
And now you're running the Franklin County ADAMH board. A couple of questions. First of all, how did you just at age 18 decide you want to run, alcohol, drug, mental health agencies, or what happened here?
A couple things. One is, I guess first and foremost, I found something I love to do.
How'd you stumble into this?
Actually, it was a progression. My father actually was a researcher for the National Institute of Mental Health. And so I had the opportunity at a young age to be around people with psychiatric illness as part of the research. And I developed an affinity for people with psychiatric illness. And I think the other part of it is that just my philosophy about those that are least among us, as well as just the issue of people with disabilities and having opportunities and trying to create positive opportunities for people with disabilities. So it all kind of melded together, and believe it or not, for the last 24 years, I've been a county board director, so I believe in the mission of helping people.
Where'd you go to school then?
I went to Wright State in Dayton, and then I went to
majored in
social work.
Okay.
Undergraduate degree in social work, and then I went to Central Michigan University, where I got a master's degree in healthcare administration. So.
And your first job was with?
My first job actually was at a little place in Troy, Ohio, the Miami County Mental Health Center.
Okay.
And I was known as what was titled a caseworker.
Okay.
And
so you've been in the trenches.
Oh yeah, yeah. And actually, I really believe that it's kept me somewhat centered and focused on what the mission is, because for 7 years when I got out of school, I worked bringing people out with mental illness, severe mental illnesses, out of the Dayton. At that time, it was known as Dayton State Hospital.
Okay.
And we brought them. It was the first wave of deinstitutionalization of people with psychiatric disorders. And so for 7 years I did that. I did suffer a little bit from a disease of thinking that I knew better. and so that's
the older you get, though, the less that disease becomes self-evident, though, I think.
I think so. I think so. And so what ended up happening is I got interested in administration. And that's kind of how I ended up here today.
So what is the ADAMH boards? And the other thing is it just kind of hit me for Bobby and Betty Buckeye, who's one of our main audiences on this. Why are drugs and mental health combined underneath one agency?
Well, one is, I think, there's a couple reasons. One is many of the people that we serve, regrettably, have both issues. They have mental health problems, maybe a major psychiatric diagnosis, and they have a co-occurring or an additional disorder, and that's substance abuse.
Okay.
And I think the other thing is it was viewed as the consolidation of both alcohol, drug, and mental health treatment in a way to create economies of scale, if you will, for the
Okay.
Bureaucracy.
Okay.
And so recently, I think just 2 years ago, the state of Ohio decided to combine their Ohio Department of Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services with the Ohio Department of Mental Health, and now it's known as the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. So you saw that consolidation now take place at the state level.
Okay.
It's been happening at the local level for
So
some time.
here at the local level, where the rubber meets the road,
Right.
exactly what is it you do here for Franklin County? And then what does Franklin County have in common with the other counties? And because you've been in Miami County, which is suburban and rural,
Right.
Butler, which
Right.
is 350,000 population, and then Franklin County, which is like, what, 1,200,000?
Yeah, right. Well, the first mission of the board is to reduce the incidence of alcohol, drug addiction, and also to help then serve the people that have a serious and persistent mental illness, as well as children with severe emotional disorders. How we do that is essentially we go through a fact-finding process to develop a community strategy about these services and the need for services. And based on that strategy, then we take the resources from the federal, state, and local levels, and we contract out with nonprofit agencies to provide the services. And then, of course, obviously, we evaluate the effectiveness of services. One of the things that keeps you interested in doing something like this is the nature of the problem, if you will, is always evolving and always presents new changes and challenges.
Well, then let me ask you this question. About a year ago or so, Franklin County got themselves one of the very first casinos.
Yes.
As I've always joked, playing the lottery and gambling in Ohio is a tax on people who are very bad at math.
Right.
And there's an old study from 1985 that says that in Ohio we have 200,000 gambling addicts and another 250,000 who are potential gambling addicts. Of that number, and how you define a gambling addict, I remember from testimony years ago, was that they bet 80% or more of their weekly income on various gambling products and everything. Have you seen this gambling casino here increase your call for gambling remediation, so to speak, and has it had impacts on other aspects of your service silos, shall we say?
Yeah, it's one of our new challenges is trying to figure out how to go about educating the community about the risks of compulsive gambling. We do see people, and there's some really tragic stories of people losing their homes and going through, obviously, divorces. The thing that's interesting is it parallels very much the same cycles that alcoholics go through.
Okay.
The compulsivity, the pleasure-seeking, so to speak, and then obviously the deterioration of functionality, family. Stress, et cetera. I think, and so on the treatment side, yes, we are seeing people that have gone through horrible situations. But those also existed prior to the opening of the casinos. I think on the prevention side and the education side, that's one that we're really trying to figure out because, interestingly enough, many seniors love to go to the casinos. And one of the things that I think we're going to really try to take a look at is how do we better educate seniors with fixed incomes on the risks of perhaps too frequently going to play those slot machines. And so we tend to think about prevention education on the child, on the adolescent and kids side, especially with alcohol, drug. But I think with gambling, I think it'll be more on the strategy around seniors.
Well, so Franklin County is one of the 3 large counties in Ohio. What are the special situations you encounter here more than you think you did back in either Miami or in Butler? What makes it pull out?
I think it's the biggest difference is the magnitude of the problem.
Okay.
We know that rates of mental illness, the prevalence studies will tell us certain statistics about, 1 in 4 may experience a mental health challenge, 1 in 100 may have a major psychiatric illness. I think just the density of the challenge, I think, is the biggest thing that has been eye-opening for me. But I think the other thing is the compounding effects of poverty in urban areas, and then the diversity. When I was in, Miami, as you described, it's a suburban rural community. Butler, 370,000 people, but they don't have necessarily the diversity of populations and immigrant groups that we have in large cities in America.
Right.
That requires us to develop new strategies about how we do outreach with these diverse groups. We have a Bhutanese community, we have a Somali community, we have a Latino community. All of those communities have their own cultures. And some of the cultures can be highly receptive to mental health care or addiction treatment, and some of the cultures, it's totally foreign.
Resistant to it. This is our issue. We'll take care of it our own way.
And so I think that's the major difference is the density and then the diversity.
When I was talking to Bill Denahan up in Cuyahoga County, he was very excised, shall we say, about what he viewed as being a funding disparity between the larger counties and the smaller counties in population, not in square miles here, for people who are watching this going, what? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, the disparities of funding have really been problematic for really the last 10 years. And I know it's something that the current state director, Director Plauck, has tried to address and is continuing to try to address. But one of the challenges that I think that I've noticed about government is that one is it tends to approach problems like a slice of the pie instead of looking at the whole of the pie.
Silos. They only look at silos at a certain point in time and just treat them all as individual silos.
Yes, and then the other thing that's both a good trait and a negative trait in my view is the incrementalism that is used in approaching solutions to problems. So let me give you an example. While we want incrementalism, when we do that through checks and balances by our different branches of government, sometimes to get a policy that is clearly out of whack or disproportionate, they want to apply an incrementalism to, quote, do no harm. And the reality is harm exists, whether it's the current inequity or a readjustment of the inequity, but yet it's the go slow. And I think somewhat that's the nature of Ohio. It is somewhat of a go slow.
Not as cautious as Indiana. I'll tell you, those Hoosiers are just, very difficult to move forward on an issue. Let me ask you this question. This looks like an ordinary ink pen. It's not. It's actually my magic wand.
Okay.
And, you may remember this magic wand from a quarter century ago.
Yes.
I do this a lot to folks, is I'll wave this over you, okay? You now have the power and the ability to ask the General Assembly. I guarantee you they'll vote for it.
Okay.
And I guarantee you the governor will sign it.
All right.
And more importantly, I guarantee you a 5-2 majority on the Ohio Supreme Court to support it. What would you like to have them do? If there was one thing that as you drive back and forth, if you're like most people whose profession is their passion is profession, you're driving back and forth to work and going, man, if we could just do X.
Yes.
What would be X, do you think, that you'd like to have done?
Without a doubt, it's investing in school-based mental health care.
School-based mental health care. Now, you're the first person I've talked to who's brought up school-based mental health care.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, one is my wife's an educator.
Okay.
And so, a retired educator. And so
I think I met her years ago. You're my best.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And you know, one of the things that I think our challenge is how do we think about, we talk about almost every day there's an article about the state of education, public education, the cost of colleges, but we don't, and you remember back during the days of legislature, we talked about coming out of the DeRolf decision, how we were going to build all these new schools and we're going to upgrade, and the state of the schools in many communities was terrible.
Right.
And I used to sit and think, here we are building these wonderful citadels of learning, but are we preparing children to learn? And so and the other thing is that's very clear here is that the demand for children's mental health care continues to grow. And so when you think about the effects of some of these shootings that have occurred, these massive tragedies, the earlier identification and detection of children with emotional problems, the burdens that are being placed on teachers, on academics, it would seem to me...
We're not trained for this at all.
Yeah, and what we really, I think, if we really want an outstanding education system, we also have to then think about how do we create, both from an early detection and treatment perspective about mental health in children, but also about how do we promote emotional development and childhood development on an ongoing, committed basis. And I really think if you really want to transform education, it's not always about, it's both the brain and the mind.
Well, let me ask you this question. So on a practical level, what we're kind of talking about here is it'd be like a joint interdepartmental project between Tracy's office and the governor's office with mental health and drug addiction issues.
Right.
And Bill Ross.
Yes. Department of Education.
Department of Education. Sort of a joint project between those two to try to. Do you have any idea how this would work on a practical basis? What would the parents see different in your schools, type of thing?
Well, we're trying this with a lot of our school districts now, and we've been putting mental health services into many of the suburban school districts in this past 18 months. And we're letting the schools define their need.
Okay.
One of the things that I think gets too top-down heavy is the idea that all policy solutions can be found on the 38th floor of whatever tower.
The 30th floor of the Rife Tower is where the governor's office is, in case we're all wondering.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we try to do is we try to reach out to districts and say, tell us what you think you need.
More of an organic approach to
an organic approach to having them identify. And each district kind of identified some more on the education side, some more on the early identification side, some making treatment services available. And I think, sometimes it's the folks down at the lowest level that really know where the real, as you described it, the rubber meets the road. And so that's, to me, that was a more common sense approach than us going in, so to speak, the board going in and saying, we think this is what you need.
All right. So you've given all this a fair amount of thought.
Yes.
What keeps you up at night?
Actually, it's something very different. And I've thought a lot about this, is what I consider the growing culture of negativity about mental health care in Ohio. It seems that I hear more and more folks saying how the mental health system in Ohio is broken. It's or how mental health care in America is broken, and it is struggling. There are cracks and fissures, so to speak. But I think it's also just about the culture of negativity. I think I'm a believer that optimism is free, and I like to believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And I sometimes worry that when we focus too much on what's wrong, we fail to recognize that every day there are young entrepreneurs out there creating new products for the marketplace, and that there are new opportunities, there are new forms of medicines, new forms of technology. There are so many positive things going on, if you just take the time to look, that within our field, that if we don't recognize that, yes, when something goes wrong in the mental health system, it tends to be horrific, and it's tragic.
Catastrophic failure. It's not a slight failure. It's a complete catastrophic failure.
It is a catastrophic failure. And so what I try to remember is that every day that 90% of what is going on for people with mental illness and the opportunities for people to recover from addictions is working well.
Okay.
Because if I don't, how can you offer people hope if the people that are responsible for providing the opportunities aren't hopeful?
Okay.
And so what keeps me up is this culture of what I call a culture of negativity, and I think there's a danger in that. It can become a self-fulfilling
But let me go to this though. Your caseworkers remind me of policemen and women, and that it would be so hard not to end up with a complete jaundiced view of the frailties of human nature. And talking to cops, this is one of the things they say they really don't like about being a cop, is that they walk, and when they're done, and I agree, after 20, 25 years, running towards the sound of gunfire is a young person's game.
That's right.
Okay. Burnout has got to be an issue with caseworkers, I would think.
It is.
And low pay.
It is, and
They get paid what, 28, 29,000?
It's a little higher now, but it's not probably proportionate to both the risk and
compared to school teachers.
Right. It's not. Well, you're right. I mean, it doesn't pay as well as school teachers, and there are probably reasons for that.
And they all have masters.
Yeah. Many of them do. Almost all of them do.
Yeah.
I do think, and I'm a good example. I mean, I told you 7 years. I did 7 years as a caseworker, and I realized that my interest lied somewhere else, and I went and pursued that academically because it isn't a well-paying job. And so it is tiring, and there is a limited lifespan, if you will, unless people can progress. I do think, interestingly enough, as we're getting older, that over the next 5 to 7 years, you're going to see a transformational change in the leadership of the public finance mental health system, just because people like me are aging out.
Yeah.
We're getting to the point where it's, our careers are pretty much done.
Although when I talk to the X generation folks, they're all happy to see us go.
as well they should.
They what they say to me is, "You boomers, you're just clogging up the whole job
That's
thing.
right.
There's so
That's
many of
right.
you. Just hurry
That's
up and
right.
retire and run off to the Florida Keys."
Florida Keys. And, it's interesting. I do think it is hard to sustain optimism and a positive orientation. But, I've always believed that if we're not the optimists, how can we begin to tell people that they can live full and productive lives with a mental illness?
Yeah.
They can recover from addiction and live and have healthy and functional relationships. So optimism, to me, is a key ingredient. I even go back and think one of the things that Ronald Reagan, I think, did tremendously well was he talked about America's best days are in front of it.
Okay.
I believe that fundamentally. And so I worry that advocates tend to get paid to be the sky is falling. You were down at the State House, and the advocates would always tell you everything's everything's going downhill.
Right.
But I wish sometimes people take a breath, take a pause, and recognize that there's much to be proud of here in Ohio.
Okay. Why do you think mental health issues and related issues to that are suddenly achieving such a focus from the chattering class? What's prompted that? I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon, because back when you were at Butler County and I was in General Assembly, we all were respectful of the mental health issues, but I don't think there was quite the same clamoring for fixing the mental health problems. What do you think?
I think it's just the size and the scope of these horrible tragedies. Has just,
Bobby and Betty Buckeye something's
Yeah.
triggered with them, and they're just
Absolutely, they're starting to say, "What's wrong?"
yeah.
What and unfortunately, they continue to occur throughout the country. I think the other thing too is that it's part of the 24-hour news cycle we live in. That there are events that occur all over this country every day that
So this
25 years ago, even you and I back, we would not have known about. So I think there's a heightened awareness, but I also think that there's a growing appreciation and understanding that there's been too much bifurcation between our emotional well-being and our physical well-being, and I think this idea of how do you bring these things together in a more integrated manner. I think it resonates with common sense, that the more we start to understand that our emotional well-being affects our physical well-being and vice versa, that's helping to promote awareness about mental health and the importance of mental health care.
I want to go back to something you brought up earlier, is the mental health in the larger urban counties. How much of that relates to the differences? I mean, one of the things when I tell the Bobby Betty Buckeye that school children in your urban cities will move 5 times in a school year, and they just look at me just kind of what, and I explain, well, it's because either the family or oftentimes the single mother is trying to stay ahead of the landlord and the rent, or they move in with a boyfriend and then things don't work out for a variety of reasons, then they suddenly move out and they end up transferring elementary schools, junior highs, and even high schools. What are some of let's go back and talk a little bit more about the urban problem as it relates to the mental health issues that you're seeing, the intersection between these two issues.
Yeah, school mobility is a huge problem in the urban communities, and I think the other part of it is that the concentrations of poverty, while poverty is not obviously a mental health disorder, the consequences of poverty can create mental health disorders.
How so?
Well, hopelessness.
Okay.
And then
the man. You only hear people in the lower economic rungs talk about the man.
Yeah.
And for those who are not watching, the man is this semi-mythological creature that runs everything and decides who lives where and decides who gets jobs and all that type of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so not only do now poverty exists in every part of our state, but the concentrations of poverty, it's like an exponential factor of, and so I think that contributes to the rates of so you have economic instability, family instability, concentrations of poverty, and lack of economic opportunity in some of our more challenged neighborhoods in every major city in the United States.
Okay.
And I think what it does is there's an exponential factor, and it exacerbates what occurs as it relates to mental health disorders.
Okay. You just got back from vacation,
Yes.
which meant that you had an opportunity perhaps to read some books.
Yes.
Was there a book that you've read recently that kind of stands out that you would recommend to people?
Actually, there were two books that I read. One is it's an older book. It's about 3-4 years old, Revolutionary Summer. And it's the period of time in 1776. And it really looks at from about the beginning of 1776 through the fall. And it's a book about the Founding Fathers and the intersection of both the military campaign of President Washington, but also the political aspects of the Continental Congress.
Yeah.
And it's a really fascinating read because it really makes you appreciate how fragile
Oh, absolutely.
this whole proposition was. I mean, there were two brothers, General Howe, who headed up the land campaign. There was Admiral Howe, I think it was, from the British side. They were very reticent during the campaign in New York to be very aggressive. They, by Washington's own admission, he said, we could have been taken out in the campaign over New York. It was pure folly that he thought he could save New York. But it was their hope that there would be, the Howes really wanted to reconcile, and they thought maybe we could get through a reconciliation, which of course obviously didn't happen because George III didn't want it to happen. At that point, he was done with it.
Yeah.
And so what it really talks about, it educates you about just how fragile great propositions can be, and fate, divine. Washington said it was divine providence. He wasn't, so that was it's a really good book. It's
Yeah, you're pointing out something that I've talked to other folks about is history a massive flow of macroeconomic sociological trends, or is it the one great person? And I've heard this before, is that actually the American Revolution was from the incompetence and the borderline insanity of George III, screwed everything up to the point where we became independent.
Yeah. And after the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was really horrific, he just.
I'm related to the Parkers and the Warrens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
remember Minton Road in Butler County?
Yeah.
That's my peeps.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're from that.
All right. That neck of the woods.
Yeah.
It's and what you realized was George III after that he had become almost to the point where it was like we're done with it.
Stake in the stand and
and there were part of the process in the Continental Congress was just they were hoping for a long time. There were many members in there that were hoping that we could reconcile and become more of the Commonwealth that's known, the Commonwealth status.
Confederation more.
Yeah, and I think the tax issues about Parliament had the view that we'll set the tax laws for everywhere in the empire, where we said, look. We can set our own tax policies, but we'll be loyal to the king, and that was the fundamental difference. The other book I read, which is actually a hobby of mine, is about a gentleman named Charles Blair Macdonald, and he is known as the father of golf architecture in America. And I have an interest in golf architecture.
I assume you golf.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I enjoy playing golf, but I've really developed, there was a whole classic age of golf architecture, and he was known as the golf evangelist. He was a good player, but he actually was the one who came over, spent time in Scotland, studying all the great holes in Scotland, came back, built national golf links over in Long Island. But it's a story of C.B. Macdonald. So it was an interesting book.
Okay.
So, two good books. Revolutionary Summer. It's a very short read.
Okay.
It's actually, for me, it was a very exciting read.
I'll pick that up.
Yeah,
I'll see if I can get it downloaded. It says a few years old. I can get it downloaded from the library and
absolutely.
I'm sure then read it for free.
Yep.
So, well. This has been Gene Krebs here with David Royer, who is the Executive Director of the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board here for Franklin County. We've been here at their offices on Broad Street having a delightful conversation and basically just renewing a friendship that we haven't had a chance to chat very much over the recent time. And so on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions, we're High in Ohio. Thank you for tuning in.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.